My 55-year-old oilfield supervisor bullied me for 3 months, so I made him think he was about to die. When I was 18, $20 an hour felt like winning the lottery. It was the early 2000s. Minimum wage was under $6. Most of my friends were folding jeans at the mall or washing dishes in chain restaurants. I was heading north to the Canadian oil patch. No degree, no trade ticket, no real plan. Just a pair of steel toes and the ability to say yes when someone asked, "You strong?" The job was well testing, which sounds technical. It isn't. You hook pressure tanks and flare stacks to fresh oil and gas wells. You let them flow. You log data. You freeze. You sweat. You haul iron. You try not to die. The flame never stops burning. The wind never stops cutting. And you're always at least an hour from the nearest hospital. 2-man crews, 12-hour shifts, supervisor and laborer. Guess which one I was? Gary was in his mid-50s, overweight, permanently flushed, the kind of man who smelled faintly of stale whiskey even at 6 a.m. He was my supervisor, which meant he supervised, which in Gary's case meant he watched DVDs in the trailer. He napped. He typed numbers into a laptop once an hour like he was running NORAD. I lifted pipe. I dragged hoses. I set up flare stacks in knee-deep mud. I tore everything down in freezing wind. Gary helped when something weighed over 200 pounds. Strangely, everything weighed 199 until I was about to herniate. His favorite hobby wasn't drinking. It was commentary. "You're not too bright, are ya? You ever done this before? You sure your old man didn't teach you anything?" That one became his favorite when he found out my dad wasn't really around growing up. I told him that once. One time. After that, every mistake came with, "No wonder he bailed." When I pushed back. Can't take a joke. I was 6'1". He was smaller. Physically, not intimidated. But 18 is a weird age. You look grown. You don't feel grown. Authority plus age plus daily humiliation builds something heavy. And I needed the job, so I absorbed it. The real insult wasn't the jokes. It was the highway. We worked remote, 100 to 350 kilometers a day. Snow. Black highways with no shoulder. Gary owned the truck. He got $1 to $1.10 per kilometer. That adds up. Some weeks he was clearing more on mileage than I made on labor. Guess who drove? Every morning, Gary would stumble into the passenger seat, smelling like a distillery accident. "I'm the boss," he'd mumble. "You drive." Then he'd sleep, mouth open, snoring, occasionally jerking awake just long enough to criticize how I changed lanes. He made hundreds. I made minimum wage for travel time. One morning we hit black ice. The truck fishtailed. My heart stopped. I corrected it. Gary woke up just long enough to say, "Don't wreck my truck," then went back to sleep. Not "You okay?" Not "Good save." Just that. 3 months of that. 3 months of being the muscle, the chauffeur, the punchline. I don't react much. But I don't do nothing forever. One afternoon we were breaking down a site early. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that hits when you've been hauling 250-pound pipe in -15 wind. Your hands stop feeling like hands. Gary was in the trailer watching a movie. I struggled with a section that genuinely needed 2 people. I walked over and asked for help. He sighed like I'd interrupted brain surgery. "You're soft," he said, standing up slowly. "At your age I could throw that by myself." He didn't. We both lifted it. Halfway through he let go early, testing me. I almost dropped it. He laughed. "You better hope your next crew isn't as patient." That sentence stayed with me, because it wasn't about strength. It was about reminding me I was disposable. The snap didn't happen at work. It happened in a small-town bar where the carpet was sticky and the jukebox hadn't been updated since the 90s. Gary was 3 drinks deep. Loose. Almost charming. I said it casually. "You know, since I drive every day and you're making bank on mileage. Maybe throw me a couple bucks." I smiled when I said it. Half joke, half not. His face changed, like I'd insulted his ancestry. "You think you deserve my money?" The volume rose. The insults sharpened. You're lucky I let you work. You're green. You don't know anything. No wonder your dad walked. That one hit. Not because it was new, because he knew it landed. And then he said, you should be grateful someone like me tolerates you. Something in my head went quiet. That hinge, it broke. I didn't argue. I didn't storm out. I finished my meal. But I wasn't trying to survive the job anymore. I was trying to end it. The next morning, about 30 kilometers from site, we passed a semi parked in a pullout. Engine running. Driver outside stretching his legs. Gary was asleep. Deep travel coma. And something aligned. I pulled over. Walked to the trucker. Explained the situation. He laughed immediately. I'm in, he said. I repositioned Gary's truck. Bumper to bumper. Facing the Peterbilt. Gary didn't stir. I got back in. Gave the signal. The trucker flashed his lights. Then laid on the air horn. Full blast. I hit our horn. Screamed like we were about to die. Yelled, we're done. Gary exploded upward like someone detonated his seat. He hit the ceiling. Hit the dash. Made a sound I've never heard from a human before or since. For one pure second, he believed he was dead. The horn blast lasted less than a minute. But that minute, it was nuclear. I peeled out before he processed reality. He was purple, sweating, half choking on threats. You could have killed me. My blood pressure. Now that I'm older? He wasn't wrong. At 18, I didn't even know what a stroke was. I was laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. Can't take a joke? I said. He tried to rage. But rage plus near cardiac event is messy. The next 20 minutes were him threatening murder while I laughed like a hyena. At sight he told me I was fired. Stormed off. Called the GM. For hours later the owner showed up. Gary had described it as attempted homicide. I told the full story on the ride back. The drinking, the insults, the mileage, the threats. The GM laughed. Not at me. Gary. Jesus, he said. He actually believed it? I wasn't fired. I was reassigned. Gary stayed. But Oilfield stories travel fast. By the time I showed up to the yard next week, people were smirking. Gary? He avoided eye contact. The story became legend. Not because it was heroic. Because it was humiliating. In the oil patch, fear is currency. And Gary had spent decades pretending he had it in surplus. Now everyone knew he jumped like a cat at a vacuum. He never mentioned my dad again. He never made another joke. He kept his distance. And that was enough. I didn't ruin his career. I didn't report him. I didn't try to get him fired. I just took something from him. Control. Bullies don't rely on strength. They rely on dominance. Once that illusion cracks, they shrink. I worked there until I went back to school. Gary retired a few years later, probably still telling people about the day he almost died in a head-on collision. Technically, he's not wrong. He just forgets to mention the truck was parked. The first week after the semi-incident was strange. Gary didn't talk to me. Not the normal silence where he was conserving energy between insults. This was different, measured, controlled. He'd sit in the trailer, type, drink coffee, avoid eye contact. When I asked for help with heavy pipe, he helped. No commentary. No you soft. No dad jokes. Just silence. At first I thought maybe I'd broken him. But that's not how men like Gary work. They don't break. They retreat. They wait. The oil patch is small. Crews rotate. People talk. And the story traveled. Not the attempted murder version. The horn version. Guys would pass me in the yard and smirk. One of the older roughnecks slapped my shoulder and said, "Kid's got nerve." That was the first time in my life I felt something shift socially. Before, I was the young laborer, the kid. Now, I was the guy who made Gary jump. And Gary knew it. About a month later, we got hit with a surprise safety audit. Oil companies love audits. Paperwork makes executives feel brave. Corporate trucks rolled up. Clipboards. Hard hats that had never seen mud. Gary panicked. Because Gary cut corners constantly. Nothing catastrophic. Just lazy stuff. Logs filled late. Maintenance checks, estimated. Equipment cleaned when convenient. Guess who had been doing the actual work the last 3 months? Me. Guess who knew exactly where every small procedural skeleton was buried? Also me. The auditors split us up for questioning. One of them asked, "Any safety concerns on your crew?" That question hung in the air. I could have ended him. One sentence. One complaint about drinking. One mention of sleeping on shift. One hint about driving hungover. Career over. Instead I said, "No safety issues." The auditor nodded. Moved on. When they left, Gary stared at me like he was trying to solve a math problem. Later that day he asked quietly, "Why didn't you say anything?" I shrugged. I can take a joke. That was the first time he looked embarrassed. Not angry, embarrassed. If you want to understand power shifts, watch what happens in crisis. January. -30. Wind slicing through everything. We were tearing down a site when the truck battery died. Middle of nowhere. No cell service. Dark coming fast. Gary tried starting it 3 times. Nothing. Then he looked at me. The man who had mocked me for 3 months. "Any ideas?" I did. I'd been watching. Learning. Absorbing. I pulled the battery. Checked terminals. Cleaned corrosion with what we had. Jumped it using equipment power. Truck started. Gary didn't say thank you. He just nodded. That nod? That was the end of it. He stopped trying to dominate. From then on, he treated me like a coworker. Not equal, but no longer prey. Here's something people don't talk about with revenge. It doesn't feel explosive. Feels leveling. The day after the semi-incident, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt lighter. Gary never apologized. He never acknowledged what he'd done. But he adjusted. And that's the real currency. Behavior change. Not humiliation. Humiliation just opens the door. For years later, I came back to the yard. Different life. I'd gone to paramedic school. Different confidence. Different posture. Gary was older. Redder. Slower. He recognized me immediately. We stood face to face in the yard between trucks. He looked smaller. Not physically. Psychologically. "You're still laughing?" he asked. I smiled. "Sometimes." He studied me for a second. Then he said something unexpected. "You had guts." That was it. No apology. No reconciliation. Just acknowledgement. And that was enough. Because the opposite of bullying isn't dominance. It's recognition. Let's be clear. What I did was reckless. At 18, impulse outran judgment. Now that I understand strokes and adrenaline and heart stress, could have gone bad. But here's the part people miss. Gary wasn't terrorized by a horn. He was confronted by vulnerability. For one split second, he felt powerless. The same way I had felt for months. And when the power equation flipped, the bullying stopped. Not because he feared me, because he couldn't dominate me anymore. Once someone shows they're unpredictable, bullies recalculate. The real revenge wasn't the horn. It was this. I didn't let him make me small. I didn't quit in tears. I didn't report him in anger. I let him think I was weak. Until the day I wasn't. And from that moment on, he treated me differently. The oil patch teaches you a brutal lesson. Strength isn't size. It's composure. Gary thought strength was volume. Alcohol. Mockery. He learned otherwise. I've been bullied before. School. Work. Life. The pattern is always the same. They test. They escalate. They expect compliance. What they don't expect. Surprise. Gary expected anger. Or silence. He didn't expect strategy. Even if that strategy was an 18-year-old's chaotic version of it. I didn't ruin his life. I didn't destroy his career. I just cracked the illusion. And once that illusion breaks, the bully shrinks.